Hello, I'm Brian and I'm just back from the photography show where I delivered presentations for Canon UK. I was really pleased that when they asked me, and I had a fantastic time. I mean, it was so good actually presenting to a live audience again after almost 18 months of Zooms and online sessions. This presentation that follows is the one that I delivered where I gave some tips on setting up the EOS R5 and the R6 autofocus system. There's tips on using some custom controls and also what the different settings may be used for different kind of subjects. This presentation was recorded live on the Sunday and it shows my slides and also it's got my voice captured. So there is some noise from the hall because obviously it's a live presentation, but I hope that you enjoy it. I must add before the presentation starts that if this has kind of got you interested in thinking, oh, I perhaps could learn from Brian, then I am running some training courses, one-day training courses on the R5 and R6 specifically. So I'll drop some links down in the description below where you can find where those training courses are. I hope you enjoy the presentation and thanks for watching. Right, we're just coming up to the stroke of 10 o'clock, so I'd like to try and start it fairly promptly. Good morning, welcome to the Canon stand. My name's Brian Worley. I'm a photographer, a trainer and tutor. Ultimately, I help people get the best out of their cameras. So Canon's asked me to come along and share with you some insights on the autofocus setup for the R5 and the R6. So what I've got is a little presentation for you. Should last just over 20 odd minutes. I'm going to make it quite straightforward. Obviously, the capability of the autofocus in these cameras is phenomenal. And in actual fact, I have been known to call it witchcraft AF. Okay, but before we go. So yeah, this is a typical example actually, the picture on the screen here, in that this is taken with an 85 f2 macro lens. The camera just completely ignores her nose and everything has just gone for the eyes. So that's an eye detection picture, straight easy portrait things. But they can do this all day by themselves. In actual fact, it means that the capability of the system means that I'm actually composing the picture rather than worrying about where to focus or having an AF point in the frame, but we'll come on to that. So, there are obviously two focus options. There's one shot and servo focus. If your subject is static, and I mean really static, typically made of concrete, steel or things like that and not moving, or you're not moving, then you can use one shot. I think I've had my camera now over a year, and in reality, I don't think I've used one shot. But I tend to shoot more moving things. If you're a landscape photographer, or you do products and you want to photograph something really quite static, one shot probably works. Actual fact for me, I'm more likely to use manual focus. But for everything else, so virtually every portrait I've taken, I'm actually using servo focus. So servo focus tracks and continuously monitors, and that means that if I'm shooting with a wide aperture lens and I'm taking pictures, if I move, or my subject moves, it's continuously refocusing up to the point that the picture's taken. So it's obviously ideal for moving or live subjects. The difference you'll notice on the screen and the viewfinder is you get green AF points in one shot, blue ones in servo focus. And if you see red ones, it means that the camera can't focus, usually because you're too close for what the lens's minimum focus distance. The servo focus will give you results like this by itself. All you've got to do is find a dog and point the camera at it. Okay, this one just happens to like chasing a tennis ball across a field, but I could have taken any one of about 12 different pictures from this sequence because they're all sharp on its eye. And it's doing that by the camera finding the dog within the frame and finding the subject's eye. But anyway, so Servo AF does wonderful things. We'll talk a lot about setting the camera up and working with the different settings. So servo, moving subject, one shot, static, but nothing static. So within your cameras, let's say the naming for groups of AF points has been renamed from AF areas to AF methods. So we're going to call them AF methods for today. And you have 8 different AF methods within the camera. That means it should cover just about every kind of discipline of photography you'd want. I'll be honest and say that on my camera, 95.5% of the time, I only use 2. So I actually turn off the ones I don't use. So we'll just look at them in brief. So we've got the face tracking, we've got a spot and a 1-point AF, expanded AF, both a cross shape and an around. So basically that's the old cross-shaped one and the block of 9. Then you've got the zone AF. So the zone is a smaller block and there's a larger zone, both horizontal and vertical. What I say to you is that it's really important that you choose an AF method that is right for you and your subject. So if you're the world's best person for tracking swifts in flight with 1 AF point, use 1 AF point. If you're me, don't use 1 AF point because you'll be rubbish at it. Okay, I need a bigger target of points, bigger zone of AF to have even a remote chance of finding a swift in the frame. So always think about that. How good are you at keeping your intended subject within the zone where it's looking for focus? Narrow it down by all means, but choose a zone that you can actually achieve with. By the way, this one's a manual focus picture. Not 1 point. So face plus tracking, this is the default setting, and it's probably the most intelligent one. By default, the camera will determine where the subject is in the frame. So if you've got it set for people, it will look for a human face. In fact, it also works quite well on primates because they have a similar face structure. If you've got animals in the frame, it'll look for an animal's head quite happily. If you want to guide the camera as to where the subject is, you can tap on the LCD, so it's that person. If I've taken a picture of you as a crowd, I can tap on the particular face I want it to identify, and that gives the camera information, but that's the intended subject to follow. So there's face. Whilst you're working with this AF method, you also have the option to switch on eye detection, which says, okay, I've got a face, this one's got 2 eyes, right, let's focus on the closest eye. So eye detection is only available when you're using the face plus tracking, and what it means is that the camera goes into that extra detail. So if you're shooting fast aperture lenses, it'll give you accurate focus on the lead eye, and you can switch between the eyes. Now in this case here we've got a little bird on a bird feeder, but I'm going to own up to this. My camera's on a tripod in the garden pointed at that bird feeder with not a very long lens on. So that means depth of field's quite limited because the camera's pretty close to the bird feeder. I'm stood inside at the end of a long cable release. That means that wherever the bird lands, the camera is finding the bird and finding its eye. And I'm shooting wide open at f2 on a 135mm lens, almost minimum focus distance. So it does a pretty good job because it's avoided all the front of the bird feeder, which normally another camera would find that front surface there, and it's gone, oh, the bird's right at the back. So that's what eye tracking will give you, that level of precision. Now, I talked about tapping on the LCD, but within the face tracking method, if you prefer, and you're used to the idea of choosing a starting point, there's a setting in the camera called the initial servo AF point for face tracking, which lets you choose a position on the screen where you're intending the subject to be. So it's a bit like you've got an AF point there, you point at the subject and you can recompose, because it said, okay, gentlemen here, you're my front row subject, pointed at you, and I can recompose, and the focus points will move as I move the camera to stay on your face. And lots of people find that initially quite natural. Also, if you're photographing something that is partly behind other things, a bird in amongst some trees, something like that, you can avoid the trees and say it's the bird in the background I want you to focus on. So that one is useful. I would change it to either the middle one or the second one here, so the initial point for face tracking or the initial point for all the different methods. It's not one you have to use. Certainly if the subject's very obvious, like my portrait type stuff, I don't use this. But if I need to be very precise as to where I want to place it, I'll use that. We've got 1 point and spot AF. So these work with a single point. The onus of this is that you're determining where the focus is going, but you're determining where the focus is going. The camera has no intelligence to move that AF point if your subject moves. That is your job. All right. The difference between the spot and the 1 point is the spot is a smaller shaped sized point. Please do not configure spot AF and spot metering. The two are different, okay? And also, if you're going to use spot metering, it meters at the center of the frame only. You'll see a gray circle. That means you've got spot or partial metering switched on, and that's where it's measuring from. You could have the AF point in the top left corner, and it's still going to meter from the center. Just be aware. With the expand AF, this is the kind of there's an initial point block in the middle, and then there's some helper points around it. But this one works because you need to get that central part of this sensing onto your subject. Once you've got it, the assistant points, whether there's 4 or 8 of them, come into play, and will, if you cut the bird or whatever drifts off from the central point, the others will help keep it in focus. But initially you still have to achieve focus with that for wherever you've placed it. And again, you're the one responsible for moving this one around the frame. Okay? Let's look at Zone AF. So Zone AF has got quite a lot of intelligence associated with it. So there are 3 zones. There's the normal square-shaped one, there's a rectangle that's horizontal and a rectangle that's vertical. You can move the rectangles around, same as you can move the square. Within your zone, it will do face detection. Okay, it doesn't do eye tracking, but it will do face detection. So any subject you're looking for a face within that block, that's where it will look, and that's where it will detect the faces in that block. So in the case of the cars here on the race circuit, if I've got a zone across, it means it skips the marker posts on the corner. But if the car comes down to there, obviously, and I'm going to bring the camera down, they'll start to be into play, but by then the car is with them. So Zone AF can work for quite a good one. It gives you it's a little bit of a broad shape, but it doesn't give you quite the whole space that face detection would. And now let's talk about the subject to detect. And this is really important to get right. Okay? So the camera will detect people and animals and no priority. I'm going to tell you a little story. This picture up there, this is the second frame. The day before, I was photographing animals, birds or whatever. This is my second picture of the day. I put the camera up, pointed it to the young lady, and the camera is chasing sheep around the background and tracking their eye. And I'm thinking, it's not supposed to do that. So I instantly thought, I've left it in the wrong setting. And it's that good in that it will track those sheep in the background instead of her, if it was set to animal, because it's looking for an animal-shaped head. Switch it back to face detection and it's quite happy to ignore the sheep. So it is really important you do select the right one. And if you're not tracking sheep or people, then the no priority means that it's actually going to look for the closest subject within the something solid. A bit like an SLR would, anything that was close has priority. And obviously you can only use eye detection when you have people or animals selected. Because if it's not a person, its eyes don't work. Speaking of eye detection, does it work? Okay, so another one, I put the camera on a tripod again. This is, again, as it says, 135 f2. and it's almost on minimum focus distance. So I think minimum focus distance for that lens from where I was positioned was just in front of the plant pot of water. And I, again, set up the camera, walked inside and grabbed the other end of the remote cable release and said, take pictures of birds. And so I'm stood there at the kitchen window watching when the bird's flying and just press the shutter. Which means that the camera is finding the bird's eye wherever it is in the frame, and I could have used any one of about half a dozen pictures here. They're all different kinds of birds. They're all sharp. Because it just goes, oh, I know that's a bird, I found the head, I found the eye, and I'll do this. And this is I had to use f3.2, otherwise people complain the beak's not sharp, because it would focus on the eyes. The other thing I'm using relatively fast shutter speeds in order that I can really check, is it sharp? I want to freeze movement. And actually my way of working is often put the camera in manual, choose the shutter speed I want, choose the aperture I want, and leave it to do auto ISO. So hence the ISO is 640. It looks like a bright day, but that gives me that shutter speed for Christmas. So birds, it works. Obscured people, it works. So this is on a pancake lens, the 40mm pancake lens. And what we've got here is, I'm laying down on the field, looking up through all the grasses here, and the camera's gone, oh, okay, the grasses are all in the front, are partly obscuring her face. It says, yep, okay, we found her eyes and we'll focus on that. Wide open, quite happily. So that's servo tracking, which means if she moves or I move, I roll on a nettle or something, it will track and it will keep the subject sharp all the time. Okay, again, you notice I'm relatively fast on shutter speeds, a 40mm pancake, and often people say to me, but camera's got image stabilization. Great. What that stops is my camera shake. It doesn't stop the model moving. So I could take this at a much slower shutter speed and she can still be blurred if she's moved. Don't mistake stabilization. It won't stabilize your subject, it only stabilizes you. Okay, so when we're working in servo focus, we have AF cases. Has anybody had an EOS 5D type camera or a 7D camera or 1DX before? Okay, so you've seen AF cases before. Good news, they've got simpler. On the R5 and R6, you have 4 choosable AF cases plus an automatic one. These only apply when you're shooting in servo AF, which, as I said, in my case, this is most of the time. And let's have a look at what you might want to use them for and when you might want to choose a specific one or let the auto do its thing. So within the case 1, it's a so-called general purpose setting, and that's what the camera is set to by default. The times that this one, it works on a lot of subjects. It actually is more capable than case 1 in an SLR. It has a bigger range of subjects it can handle. The times where you don't want, it might not be ideal, is if your subject rapidly speeds up or slows down, if your subject moves away from the AF points or is obscured, you might want to use one of the other cases. Case 2, this is what I call the Marshall tracking one. So if you're on a racetrack and you're panning with a car, in the UK, at some point you're going to pan with a car and there's going to be an orange thing between you and the car, usually wearing a boiler suit. Yeah, those Marshalls, love them, but what would you prefer the camera to do? Refocus on the back of the Marshall, or just wait a little bit longer till the car appears past them? Same thing if you've got a bird crawling in and walking around the ground level and there's reeds and bits of grass sticking up. You don't want it to refocus on the grass, you want it to stay with the bird. Case 2 is the one that says, don't suddenly react to a new subject. And then case 3 and 4. So case 3 is the rapidly find a new subject. So something closer, that's the right sort of subject, refocus on it. All right, that's the typical one for birds in flight in the sky. If they're flying amongst trees, you might have other subjects in front, you might want to look at another case. But often for birds in flight in the sky, that would be the one I would go for. Case 4. This is for subjects that accelerate quickly. And it doesn't necessarily mean you have to be on a quad bike. Think about it, something that accelerates quickly could be it's coming across the frame and then it changes and comes towards you. So it's had a big change. It's not changed speed, but the speed towards the camera has changed significantly. So that could be a car coming into a corner, coming out of the corner. That could be a small Jack Russell chasing around your garden. It's going across the frame, almost no speed towards the camera, and then suddenly it comes towards you. So Case 4 copes with that slightly more erratic, faster accelerating motion. But the good news, that's the good news. There's an automatic case. So Case A says, okay, it's like supersized Case 1. So Case A tries to detect what kind of motion is going on and pick one of the other cases for you. That means it can cope with a big range of subjects, and to be honest with you, often it gets it really right. The times I would say perhaps not to use Case A is when you specifically want the characteristics of one of the other cases. Okay, so that's those. Changing AF points. I'm going to give you some tips for your cameras now. So the obvious one is you press the AF selection button on the back, and then you move the joystick. Yeah, which you're looking through, so you've got to press that one and that one. I think it's a little bit hard work, but anyway. And to change AF method, you've got to press that button on the end again, and then the multifunction button, and step through the different AF methods. If you can obviously use a touchscreen as well, but I'm usually looking through the viewfinder. Customized buttons will make it easier and faster to change both of these things. And by that I mean the AF point button, that's the one on the top right hand corner of the back of your camera, can be set up for direct AF method selection. So what that means is that every time you press the button, it just advances to the next AF method. Now on my camera I've reduced it to 2 AF methods, so effectively it's toggle between face and 1 point. I don't have to do anything else. Press it once, it's face, press it again, it's 1 point, press it again, it's back to face. I've also customized the multi-controller, or what you commonly call the joystick, such that it's set up for direct AF point selection. That means that when you just nudge the joystick, up, down, left, right, it moves the AF point for you. You don't have to press anything else, you just move the joystick. So if you're looking through the viewfinder, your thumb's moving the AF point if you need to. As a top tip, if you want to recenter the AF point, push the joystick into the body and it will jump back to the middle. There is one other one here, which is if you've got a control ring mount adapter or an RF lens with a control ring, you can use the control ring to change AF methods with your R5 and your R6. You know, you half press on the shutter, move the control ring, and it will change the methods. Right, back button AF. Does anybody use this? Do you use longer lenses as well? Okay. So back button AF is, like most of the Canon cameras, is set up by default almost. So the AF on button on the back of the camera is set up to operate for back button focus. It drives AF. The problem is the camera is also set up so the shutter button also drives AF. To configure back button focus, what you need to do is obviously stop the shutter button activating the focus. That's the only step. So there's one step. Go to the shutter button in the custom controls and make it either do metering start or metering lock. If you want to shoot a sequence of pictures with all the exact same exposure, you'd use the metering lock. So, but if you've got, say you're going to photograph cross-country horse racing, and a horse is coming towards you, then it goes under the shade of a tree and back out into daylight, you need to meter every frame. So that your choice there of how you choose to work with each of those. So, super whistle stop store. All I'm going to say is a few points. One, realistically, know what your subject's doing. If it's vaguely got a chance of moving or you're on a moving platform, use Servo. If it's definitely static, it's a building, it's a product on a table, one shot's okay. But I often actually just use manual focus for those kind of things. The phase plus tracking method is incredibly good. I'll give you an example. The lady here is running through the trees. This is frame 12 of a 15 frame sequence, every single one sharp on her eye at f2 as she's running through there. Even when she starts to be obscured by the branches on the trees, it still tracks her eye. So it really does good. The Zone AF methods will track heads, birds and people's heads, but it won't track eyes. And I would really recommend you spend a few minutes to customize some of those controls to give you real speed and ease of using the AF on the cameras, because that's where you'll get the most out of your cameras. But before, it almost feels like the end, doesn't it? But I have one more important slide for you. And this is the last important slide of the day. Firmware updates. Has anybody updated the firmware in their camera? Well, a couple of people. Okay, for the rest of you, go and check the firmware in your camera is 1.4. If it's not, go to canon.co.uk/support, download the update and install it. Because basically over the life of a product, and the R system cameras do get quite a lot of updates, there are updates for your cameras which improve the performance. If you've got RF lenses particularly, they all pretty much have updatable firmware in them. And there have been quite a lot of updates for lenses too. So go check the lenses that you have and see if there's firmware for those. It takes about 5 minutes to upgrade a camera firmware and a couple of minutes to do a lens firmware, and it's something you can do at home quite easily. Okay, I'm going to stop at that point and say thank you very much for rapt attention. If you enjoyed that quick little presentation, don't forget training courses you can find in the description below, and also I've just got one photo to share. So someone took this actually on the Monday when the EOS R5 R6 autofocus presentation was simply mobbed. I mean, I came out at about half an hour beforehand and virtually all the chairs at the front had gone, and there was already a queue forming of people stood around the back of the space. So by the time the presentation was in full flow, it was almost 5 and 6 people deep. I'm just stunned, and I got to say thank you to everyone who clearly made my day. Hope you've enjoyed this. Thanks very much. Bye bye now.